This is Rogues on the Road with Matt Froman and Rich Marshall, where we talk food, travel, craft beverages, and everything in between.
Welcome to Rogues on the Road. We're going to talk food, travel, adventure, a bit of booze, and everything in between.
Everything in between. And that's where we seem to be going a lot of these days.
I'm Rich Marshall.
I'm Matt Froman, and we've got a very special guest with us tonight from Diner Brew Company.
Mr. Chris Sheldon.
Yes.
Thanks for coming.
Guys, thanks for having me on tonight.
Hey, thanks for coming on, man. We're excited to talk cider, and not just cider and some different types of cider. You take a very different approach to it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll go down whatever road you want to talk about.
Apples to another level.
It's going to get weird.
Very good.
All right. So tonight's show beverage, our first show beverage, we're going to do 3 beverages, correct?
Correct.
Right. We're going to do 3 beverages. We'll work our way up.
I've got 3 in front of me.
That's beautiful.
Perfect. Not for long.
You are out of where now?
So we're producing in Mount Vernon, New York.
Okay.
And we're mostly a Westchester-based company.
Okay.
We are quickly expanding our footprint into the city, 5 boroughs, and we touch some of Dutchess and Putnam County as well.
Yeah.
Mostly, we just wanted to have our production limited to where we're from and where we're producing, and get out to retail in our local market. So it's a hyper-local product. We make it all here. Orchards in Rockland County,
Cool.
Right across the Tappan Zee Bridge, and it is being distributed, self-distributed by moi.
Yeah, I know what that's like.
Yeah,
That's a work.
it's a hustle, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But we're doing that throughout Westchester County mostly.
Cool.
Very cool. How long have you been going?
We've been up and at it since about October. We've been in front of the public. We were licensed by the state in August, and we started our commercial lease last May.
Oh, well,
That's
so
cool.
pretty new
so
still.
about a year old, according to the lease. We haven't been able to, make money that entire time, but since we were able to sell October, so like 5 months old.
Perfect.
And you are actually you're using apples pretty much just from New York State, but we're going to talk about it when we
Solely.
get deep into it.
Exclusively from New York
Yeah,
State.
and
cool.
you've got some really interesting. I saw some interesting apple pictures, so we'll talk about that too. I'm going to post. I'm posting a link right now for Diner Brew.
Sure.
While we're doing that, why don't we crack open your flagship and what you think your flagship is?
Yeah, sure. No, it's definitely our flagship. It's our bestseller. It's our Cidre des Huguenots, which is the mascot from New Rochelle, the Huguenot, and that's my hometown. That's why we named it the Cider of the Huguenot. Goes back to a little bit of historical interpretation. They settled the town, brought a lot of pomological knowledge with them, and helped bring some of the first orchards into New York State. There are actually like 3 pears from New Rochelle. The Lawton Blackberry is from New Rochelle. So,
And these are varietals of heirloom apples.
yes, the Churchland, Huntington, and you're going to have to get back to me on the third one. I'm forgetting it. I'll look it up during this. But
Sounds good.
We've got a bunch coming from the town, and I'm also French in my inheritance. So basically, I wanted to have this tie-in to this farmhouse
Yeah.
fermentation, my French family, the fact that New Rochelle is settled by French apple growers. So that's where it all comes to this name, the Cider of the Huguenots.
That's cool.
And it's my farmhouse cider, wild yeast from upstate New York in the St. Lawrence River Valley.
Oh.
And so the yeast is from New York. The apples are coming from Rockland County. We like to have a nice blend of bitter apples, high acid apples in there, good dessert apples, so you have nice sugars on there too,
Yeah.
to ferment to a higher alcohol level. It's very dry. 7.3% alcohol, and
That's pretty high.
That kind of it's not the norm for the cider making industry to have fairly high alcohol levels and dry ciders. Mostly they're sometimes perceived as being overly sweet, so it's a little bit different.
So your ciders are a combination of different apples?
It is. We use a lot of different blends with our partner orchard, the Orchards of Conklin. They like to use a Honeycrisp Mac blend as a base a lot. We get a lot of wine sap apples. We're using a lot of Gold Rush. We will get into actually some experimental apples from the Cornell School of Agriculture.
That's
Cool.
cool.
Yes, so we get to dabble in a lot of stuff working with those guys.
That's really cool.
As of late, we've been working with a lot of Ruby Frost, which is a newer variety, but it's wonderful. It's very crisp, clean, lots of good sugar level on it. It's very dry too when it's fermented out. So
And that's your typical style. You're not doing. I mean, Rich, you're from the UK, obviously. So
Scrumpy.
you're a scrumpy.
That's a killer, man.
Yeah.
You'll like this. This actually has a lot of qualities like a traditional scrumpy because it is wildly fermented.
Okay.
So it's got a little bit of rustic character to it, that almost tart
Earthy.
tinge.
Yeah.
Yep, earthy little phenol to it.
Right.
Here,
Let's crack it.
Give
Let's
a
crack
try,
it.
Yeah.
So this is the first one. This is called. Forgive my French or lack thereof, but I'm going to call it the
Say it in English.
Yeah, because I'm from
Pom.
Huguenot, right?
Yes,
Huguenot. And this is your flagship cider. This is definitely available throughout the tri-state area. That is beautiful. Oh, he's getting up. All right.
Good, man.
Usually we're getting up for this.
You
cool.
are.
We're getting served. Cheers, man.
Thanks, mate.
I'm here to serve.
All right. So there's. Yeah, it's got a nice little, that farm style kind of haze, kind of gives you a nice little wild kind of. You definitely get apple on it, which is great.
And this is a combo of 3 different apples.
This one is, let's see what batch we're on here. 4. So this would have had some wine sap, some Granny Smith. This would have also had some Fuji in it. I should say that into wine sap, Granny Smith, some Fuji, probably some Ruby Frost in this blend as well. Got to look back at the notes, but
That's
generally that's what we're working with at this time of the year.
Cool.
That's great.
Cheers.
Well, cheers, Chris.
Cheers, guys.
Gypsy.
Thanks for
Rich,
playing.
cheers. Cha-ching. All right, here we go.
Cheers, y'all.
Oh, it's got a nice little kick in the end.
That's nice.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
smooth.
you.
It's funny when you go drier with a cider and
Mm-hmm.
a little, to me, to a little more high ABV.
Mm-hmm.
You lose the fact that it's a cider, and you still. I think this is really well balanced. That you actually.
I think a lot of people think ciders are highly carbonated. Ciders I'm used to back home are not carbonated at all, hence the scrumpy and sort of flat, kick you in the balls the next day sort of thing.
Cider can be anything from still all the way to highly petulant, like you're saying, or sparkling.
Right.
And there's so many methods to do that. You can use a forced counter pressure carbonation on that. You could be doing it naturally in the method, the champagne method, essentially. Letting a re-fermentation happen in the bottle. Generally, you get that kind of like spumante or champagne-like carbonation level to it after that. But it can also be like a traditional scrumpy. It can be light on the carb, whatever natural petulance it gets, but not too much. Maybe the container wasn't fully sealed or something along those lines,
Right.
Only available in gallon size.
Yeah, exactly.
It has to be finished in an hour.
The worst hangover I've ever.
my
One of the
God.
worst hangovers I've ever had
It's not
was
even a hangover.
was from cider, and that was in the UK. I was in, but they were serving cider. Actually, they rolled kegs, wooden barrels, actually behind the bar.
Sure.
And they tapped them there.
Yep.
Super cool.
And there were bits of seeds and all sorts of
Totally unfiltered,
unpasteurized,
natural cider.
Yeah, I'm
Just
sure.
wonderful stuff.
I think there were a
Brilliant.
few pieces of appendages from cider makers, but that just kind of adds a certain I don't know what.
Cider making lore has so many different stories for weird little one-offs that you can do. One historical tradition that I always thought was super weird and never tried it myself, but cider's totally devoid of nutrient content or amino acid protein sort of based stuff that helps with healthy cell division and helps fermentation along, so the building of that the colony of yeast essentially at the bottom of your cider. So one method I've read about in English cider making specifically, and Rich, maybe you've heard of this, is taking a slab of beef, like a T-bone steak, and you hang it in the cider, and obviously it's got a lot of protein content to it, so it provides that nutrition that the yeast needs to eat in order to then healthily ferment the cider, which it's missing if it doesn't have that. Nowadays we have scientific adjuncts. We can literally just use yeast nutrient or yeast energizer, and that's what we add in there so that we don't get the flavor of raw beef in our cider, you know?
Is it a quicker process than brewing beer?
No, it's actually a much slower process. So like beer, you could turn a quick beer around in a week. Once you're done brewing it, you could be done fermenting in less than a week. Actually, they're starting to do yeast. White Labs is putting out high pressure lager yeast, that can now turn around lagers even in less than 2 weeks, which is really
that's a little unusual.
Remarkable, because lagers in the beer world are known as being like a 2-month age at least sort of product. But cider, no matter what, if you want to do a natural clarification with it, cold crash, whether or not you're using wine adjuncts like ketosane and kielsosol, which are natural sort of clarifiers, takes around a month and a half to 2 months to really process a whole batch, get it to where I like it to look, and then carbonate it up and then start packaging it.
Shipping it out, right?
Yep.
Cool.
And it's funny because New York State, I mean, we've got breweries, cideries, distilleries opening up left, right, and center.
Many cideries?
Yeah, and you'd think
Bunch.
there's a bunch.
Yes.
In fact, Harvest Moon Farm.
Just stopped in there last week.
Yeah. And
good guys, they should definitely get a plug. Their beet cider is amazing. Try
so
it.
we've actually had it on the show.
You have, cool.
We've actually had it on the show. But it was funny. I was chatting with those guys, and I really thought cider was really kind of produced, all in one collective kind of way. And in speaking with you, and speaking obviously with you, Rich, and the UK and American cider, they're actually kind of all produced very differently. And specifically you were trained in like a French style, which if you can explain the differences between an American style cider,
Sure.
A French and a...
So I wouldn't say formally trained, but I've definitely, my family is French, and they were eau de vie makers, and I kind of have tried to lift that mantle up. It was dropped for a couple of generations, but the natural low wine product that you make eau de vie and Calvados from is hard cider. So that goes back, and I like to kind of like think of that as me picking up on a historical interpretation. But I have been to Normandy. I went to the Route de Cide, or the cider route, in the Pays d'Auge, which is the land of the trout up in Normandy, kind of 2 hours away from where the D-Day beaches are.
Oh, wow.
But it's known for its cider making. Some of the best Calvados and cider makers in the world are coming from there.
And old growth, too, right? There's old growth apple.
Old growth apples, old heritage bittersweets. You get stuff like Binet Rouge and Moulin à Vent and all these French names that no one would understand if I keep going. Yeah. But they're wonderful apples, and they have such sort of playful names to them. They translate to like the little yellow and like the red guy in the wind or something like that. Like they're really
the dead guy in the
yeah.
And if you go to the UK, it's like it translates to like the drunken Bobby.
Yeah. The UK has some really nice varietal names on their old ciders too. Like Snubnose is one I always thought was really funny,
that's cool.
and that's a good one. But anyways, these are bittersweet and bitter sharp apples, and because their name denotes what they are, essentially, in terms of their flavor profile. They have good sugars for fermenting. They're usually small. They're not pretty. They're hard to ingest when you're eating apples because they have a lot of tannins in their skin.
Almost like a crab apple.
Like a crab apple, which also have those tannins, which make it very hard and unpalatable when you're eating it. Leaves sort of a residue or film on your teeth that like you're used to having when you have like something very bitter.
It's like an unprocessed olive.
Yes. So those ciders, exactly.
I used to do that to my
or even
school
one of those,
kids.
Like,
it was cool.
That's why you're fired.
That's why I got fired. Like, oh, look at their olives. Can I try them? Sure.
I think it took an industry step up, I think,
Congrats.
But these are apples that are really not meant for eating. They're great when you can eat them, and I've done it and I loved it, but it takes a particular palate to like eating them. They're really good when you turn them into cider or use them for alternative purposes.
Right.
Jams, jellies, that sort of stuff. But they have bitterness to them, so they have a complexity just like wine because they're bringing tannins to the table. And what helps with that, and what I noticed is, in my travels in Normandy, they use less bitter sharp varieties and more bitter sweet varieties. And as I got further away from this region called the Pays d'Auge, further toward the D-Day beaches actually, and I'll only speak to where I went. There's so much more that I need to explore in French cider, but I went up to the D-Day beaches and I was closer to Brittany, and I was getting cider blends that definitely had more bitter sharp apples in them.
Interesting.
And all of a sudden the flavor complexity started to just jump out at me because I have more acid level, you have a higher acid, tannins, and then you have good sugar level for fermenting, so you get a really nice and complex cider that is awakening different parts of your palate and different parts of your sensory sort of perception. And that was a very cool kind of like difference that I noticed between close to Brittany ciders and then Norman ciders.
So you're traveling and kind of developing your palate as
Research.
you were doing research. You were
I was
developing
doing research, asking all the cider makers in their caves. They call them caves there, but basically they're cellars. You know, that's where they invite you in and you try their stuff. And I was asking them about their making methods. Speaking in my broken Franglish, essentially.
At least they appreciate when you at least try.
There was a great moment where I was in the cellar for Madame Fouché, who's a really good cider maker outside of Cambrai, where Camembert cheese comes from in Pays d'Auge.
Yep.
So anyways, she's got this wonderful, wonderful house on top of a hill, and her orchard is this rolling hill as you go up. And there were these American expats who were living in Britain and on a week's vacation on the cider route. For whatever reason, they thought it would be a cool thing to do.
Absolutely.
Didn't speak a word of French, so I got a kick out of translating for them and getting them stuff. Like, she didn't understand a word they were saying, so basically I was able to be the bridge in that moment where they were like, we heard about this stuff called Pommeau. Does she have any? Can we try it? And I'd like translate
That's
it. And then
cool.
by the end of the day, I'm doing, and this is like an 85 to 90-year-old woman, I'm taking shots of Calvados and Pommeau with the madame and the family, and their kids are running around in the garden, and like, you know, they're in the cellar with me, kind of like having like this tasting with her. It was a really fun moment.
You were probably in heaven at that point.
I was loving it, yeah, because I went there partially to visit my family, who I had never really met my French family at the time. A bunch of second cousins. My dad has like, I think it's like 18 first cousins over there throughout like Paris, Normandy, the Banlieue outside. But it was cool because I stayed with them. They live in a region called the Sarthe, which is just below Normandy and above the Loire Valley. And it's on this river. They name regions in France a lot after the river. So Loire is named after the Loire river. This one is named after the Sarthe River. And yeah, they have a great apple growing tradition there. It's actually the third largest region for apples in France. Stayed there. My cousin has like this pseudo orchard and farm, and got to like kind of like hang out in paradise, and
That's awesome.
And then go and do the exploration for the kind of like, hey, how is French cider making really done? And I know you asked about the differences between American and French cider.
Yeah.
Generally, there are a lot.
Yeah.
So we've got with the type of apple.
I mean, type of apple, you know, I think most people that, you know, that consume have a basic knowledge of fermentation. You know, you mash your apples, you pitch your yeast, and you wait, and then you rack, and then you carbonate and bottle, and you drink.
Yep.
But there are subtle differences between them, and you actually brought a cider today, too. That shows
that would be the one we just tried, was really the Farmhouse fermented cider. I call it my Franco-American hybrid cider, because one major difference between French and English cider that differentiates my Cidre des Huguenots between a traditional French cider is alcohol level, dryness, and their kind of correlation in between. So like, for instance, that Cidre des Huguenots is 7.3% alcohol.
Right.
I let that farmhouse yeast actually go all the way and ferment out almost all the residual sugars from that cider. I do that actually by adding nutrients in my fermentation, which help the yeast along.
Keep
and
them going.
Keep them healthy. And stirring, agitating, aerating the whole way, you're able to really create a high alcohol and dry cider. But in French cider making, they have a method that creates a naturally stuck fermentation. So it's, excuse me, actually the exact opposite of what I'm doing when I make my Cidre des Huguenots, other than it's starting from a wild culture on both sides. So what they do is something called couvage. When they will macerate their apples, they rest the apple pulp. And what the cheese essentially, or what the macerated apple stuff, they let it rest after it's been macerated for like up to 24 hours is what I was finding at some of these farms I went to.
So it's almost like you're getting wild yeast that are beginning to, it's almost like a cold ship.
Getting exposed as it's sitting there, but the main purpose for it is actually to draw the pectin, and it gets a richer color is what some of the cider makers I talked to actually were harping on, and that's why they say they do it. But it's also for this process where the pectin leaches out of these high pectin apples. And what that does is when you press the pulp afterward, you're able to actually extract a juice with a high pectin level in it. You add, nowadays we add different sort of scientific additives, calcium chloride, oftentimes as an ionic kind of bonder for this pectin. And as you're fermenting, the pectin all coagulates at the top of the cider. You let it sort of start naturally. You hold it cold. You make sure it's a very cold and slow fermentation so there's not too much bubbling. And this hat forms on top of the cider.
I was going to say, it almost sounds like a mother from making vinegar.
It kind of is.
Almost like a bacterial mat.
It's not a bacteria in itself. It's just literally this jelly of pectin. If you can imagine it, it's like
apple jelly.
It's like your grandma taking, Granny Smith apples and, cooking them until she can literally turn that into pectin so that she can make jellies with the Granny Smith apples.
Yeah.
So it's sitting on top of the cider. It's been bonded together by that calcium chloride, which is ionized and make it very ionically charged. And then the idea is that the pectin is drawing, because it's ionically charged, all the nutrients out of the cider. Any amino acids that are there are being attracted up to the cider. The yeast colony on the bottom is very slowly fermenting, and it's actually getting stuck as it's fermenting because it doesn't have any healthy kind of nutrients for it to eat along the way.
Because it's being drawn up by the
it's being drawn up by the jelly on top. Huh. And so the cider in between is fermented to about 4, maybe 4.5 to 5% at max. And it's naturally sweet with the sugars from the cider itself. No additives, no nothing, no chaptalization. It's literally just
in the raw.
A natural, raw, wild fermented cider. And then they do this method they call Cidre, which is just to pull underneath. So essentially you rack the cider that's in between the two, move it into another vessel, let it sit for another few months to secondary cold crash, clarify. And at the end of the day, you're bottling something that usually will be what they call in the bottle bouche, so it's re-fermented in the bottle and it's very carbonated using that method champenoise. But essentially it's a 4 to 5% cider, and it's naturally sweet with all the flavors coming from the apples in the pressing, so you don't have to, excuse me, phone's ringing there, so you don't have to add sugar to give it that flavor. Yeah. So a lot of times
you're not back sweetening.
No back sweetening.
You're not back sweetening. You're not adding cider. It's a very, very authentic process, and you can definitely taste the authenticity.
You get flavor. You get like the sort of hints of honey and mellow sweet kind of juice, even though you can taste the alcohol, but it's very well blended. Very floral notes in that sort of cider. I drank way too much while I was over there, and
it's research.
Well, yeah, it was research. Yeah,
but I think
that's what I told him at duty free too when I was bringing 12 bottles back.
This is research.
Yeah,
it's research.
Yeah,
it's research. But it's funny, like, because most people go to the Loire Valley, and a lot of people know about Calvados. I'm a huge fan of Calvados. I love Calvados, but I was unaware of how big the cider movement and cider production, and it's still going on. That's happening over there, and I think that's
and it's grown, or is it growing, or it's just always been.
I think the commercial end of it is growing, and the bigger producers over there are becoming more and more easily found over here in the United States. Names like Domaine Dupont, Christian Drouin, from Brittany, Eric Bordelais, who makes these wonderful, wonderful seed and poire, or Perry's and ciders. But honestly, I think that the tradition over there has been well established for a long time.
Yeah.
It has had a foothold for many centuries, and it is a trip to take, because when you go, you realize that the big producers who we can find over here from there, the exports, aren't nearly the majority of what's going on there. Most of the cider makers over there and perry makers over there are making, basically they have farms. The laws are a lot more lax from what I found in terms of how you can sell on premises or even sell to anyone, for that matter. And sanitary standards are way less too.
I worked in the French Alps for a summer, and we went down to a winemaker with 12 5-gallon water jugs, and they literally just filled them up with wine.
People are doing it in their backyards, and they have, whether or not they're a family that's been on a farm for multiple generations, or they just buy a property and it has trees on it, and it press in the garage, they'll do it, and then they'll sell it. And I had one guy quote me, he was selling like 20,000 liters a year.
Jeez.
And I think on average, the average French person will consume something like 5 gallons of cider annually. So a lot of these sales are coming direct to consumer. They're going, and whether or not they seek it out or they ship it or however the hell they do it, they're basically selling off their farm stand, and they're selling through cases upon cases of cider in 750 milliliter bottles. and it's not a problem. So
That's really cool. It kind of reminds me of Plan B, when Plan B got his start.
Right.
Something like that,
where
yeah.
he was just at the end of his driveway with like a lemonade stand almost,
Right.
except it was beer and people.
And the Calva and Eau de Vie makers are the same way.
Right.
You know, so the best part about going to the regions that we're talking about are you're going to run into these like kind of like tourism maps, right, that tell you about the big guys and some of the medium
Right.
guys. But as you're driving around on the roads,
Find the little guys in
you
between.
find all the little guys, and you
That's
realize just how much cider making
Yeah.
is going on,
Yeah.
and what you couldn't get your hands on
Right.
if you weren't there.
And everyone has like a little secret little family thing that is, I think, so historically
Right.
important and needs to get passed down as well. And I think that translates probably to any country.
Right. Is hard cider still quite new in the United States?
As a
General daily beverage?
As a commercial commodity, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Its popularity has become
grown.
extraordinary in the last like 5 years.
Yeah. Right.
And there have been a few flagship kind of brands that have led the charge.
Right.
There have been major brands that have been around for a long time, and they're owned by, I think, Bulmers, but like Magners, Bulmers,
Right,
Strongbow.
right.
You know, the UK stuff that's been making it over here for a long while. But then New York State, we've also got Angry Orchard,
Right.
represented by Boston Beer. So they're doing gigantic production.
And they
work
just opened their
In Walden.
in Walden, New
Right.
York.
with Christ,
Yeah.
which is one of the largest, if not the largest, New York State orchard. So like they work right on their property
That's
and
awesome.
have the facility right there. So you know, I think that ciders have had a foothold for a long time. You talk about the boutique brands that have been around for a while. I've seen the name Eden at least for the last decade, making ice ciders up in Vermont. Farnham Hill, you know, Steve Wood, who runs that orchard, and Cidery has been doing it since the 80s, I believe. He's thought of as kind of like the harbinger of like the craft cider movement in the United States, and has been growing these traditional English and French bitter sharp and bitter sweet varieties for just as long. They're apples that were kind of passed over by commercial growers for a really long time, and old forgotten orchards were out of vogue, and now in the last 10 years they're very in vogue for your, you know, whether or not it's someone who's a cider enthusiast like myself, or a hobbyist farmer, or, you know, someone who actually owns a commercial orchard and wants to start planting these varieties again. They're becoming much more popular, and actually the price for bins of cider apples in the Hudson Valley has gone up.
It's gone up
A lot in the last couple of years.
and that's great to see.
It is. Farm agriculture in New York State helps the farmers extraordinarily, and stuff like that where supply and demand gets affected by it, just the proof is in the pudding right there.
Yeah, and
How is apple growing in New York State with your variety of climate?
It's wonderful.
Is it?
We've always been one of the largest in the country. I've heard cited. I've seen it cited that we're the second largest state for apple growing. We definitely have, of the large apple growers in the United States, some of the oldest orchards in the country, and some of the oldest orcharding practice.
Yeah.
I mean, even just talking about the Huguenots, part of the reason I find it so fascinating is they settled New Rochelle in the 1600s.
Holy crap.
So they've been around for a while, and they were back before the kind of industrialization of these small municipalities and towns up here in Westchester. They were farms, and on the Long Island Sound, basically they would come to the Sound. You stay near the water like everyone does, whether or not it's a bay or a river, and these long strips of farms would just split the town and head up toward Scarsdale, head up toward White Plains, and people would run these gigantic orchards throughout Westchester County.
Wow.
You still see a lot of old crab apples throughout our immediate area, mulberry trees, that sort of stuff that they would have brought.
And we've had, you know, it was interesting 2 years ago, we had that late frost, or actually it was more like a late freeze, and the apple blossoms, it killed them. You know, some farmers in the Northeast lost, you know, 70-80% of their crop. And the cool thing is those trees didn't use the energy to produce apples that year because they had no buds on them, so they didn't produce. So they had all this pent up energy in them. And last year, I remember it was either last year or the year before.
It was 2017.
It was 2017.
Fall harvest. We had a bumper crop,
It
which was really nice.
I remember going up the Taconic Parkway and seeing apple trees in full bloom that I had no idea were even producing apples.
Right.
You know, and obviously it was part of some old farm and just old trees.
Well established, right?
Right, and it produced apples.
Going to visit you, I saw so many trees that I knew were going to bear this year. I was just looking at them. That area is loaded with old apple orchards. Yeah,
up 87.
Yeah, well, he came up to excuse me, Taconic Distillery.
Right.
Yep.
And like one of the first things you were saying was like,
Holy
"Oh, there's
crap.
this orchard here and this orchard here," and like, do you think maybe?
I only knew it by like the Google Map route I was taking. I was like,
right,
well, I was on route whatever, and there was an orchard over to my left.
There's a whole
kind of
corridor
funny, yeah.
going that way.
Right.
Yeah.
And in a sense,
And none of them are commercial production.
No.
Is the wonderful part about it. Someone bought a house that had the trees on them
Right.
for 100, however many years,
Right.
50, 100 years.
Come
and all
pick-
of a sudden,
yeah.
like, they've got this bounty that's very popular to people like me, but they couldn't care less about it.
right,
You know?
right. That one farm that I kind of put you in contact with.
Right.
I mean, they've got probably 24 trees, well growth. They need to be topped, but they're like, yeah, we use a few apples for pie and that kind of thing, and give some away. And it's like, give me all the apples, make cider. I will give you some
looking at
cider
it like,
entertaining.
bring it to me.
Come on in.
Bring them to
Come on
me.
in.
Give it to me.
That's awesome.
That's excellent. All right. So speaking of cider, let's move into should we move into the second cider? Because
Sure.
you mentioned ice cider.
Sure.
There is ice wine, which comes out of Canada, but this is an ice cider. Have you had an ice cider
Never
before?
had it.
Do you know what an ice cider is?
No idea.
It's actually pretty cool.
Okay.
Shall I?
Go for it.
Do it. Make it happen.
Okay, so ice wine, ice cider, both really cool products, and you're right. Generally, you do see ice cider coming as a tradition from the Quebec region. I think that's where it started, but it is very doable in the northern reaches of New York. We did one here in the Hudson Valley this year. We had the right weather patterns for it. You see a lot of them coming out from Vermont. Eden was the place I had quoted. That's another one. The Finger Lake region.
Yep.
You get a lot of ice ciders coming out of. Basically, what happens is you need to do it one of two ways, and I'll tell you which one ours is. Our dry ice, Diner Brew Co's dry ice, now available throughout Westchester, is a natural cryoconcentration. So this is more akin to what winemakers are using for ice wine.
Okay.
Essentially, you let the grapes or apples freeze on the bow, literally on the tree. It freezes the cell walls. The next time it's warm enough, the cell walls have been broken, so the water content in those cells is able to evaporate out naturally. You lose by volume water, but you concentrate the sugar of the apple, and so you're able to actually get a concentrated, more, not only just a concentrated sugar level, but a concentrated apple flavor
Right.
from these apples.
That's cool.
So then you crush and press that. It's actually a less efficient way to cryoconcentrate and increase that sugar level and that concentrated flavor of the apple. And I'll get into the second method in a second. But what it does is give you a residual bump in your gravity levels or your sugar so that you can ferment to a higher percentage. So that's a good example of what we did here with our ice cider, which is Gold Rush, nice acidic variety of apples.
I just posted on our Facebook page what is ice cider, so if people want to see it, they can do that.
Cool. Yeah, this is a nice little tutorial for it. So this is Gold Rush apples, wine sap apples, and those had an incredible sugar level after we did the cryoconcentration with them. Wine sap is a really wonderful old American variety, and it's a lot of this blend.
So cryoconcentration.
Freezing.
Sounds painful.
It sounds painful. It's like imagine like Mr. Freeze like hit the apples with like his ray gun or something like that. It's just essentially freezing. It's like almost like frost distilling or making an ice bock beer, if you've heard of that technique. But you're essentially just letting the product freeze and then thaw.
Yep.
And in that process, you're able to get a more concentrated juice out of it.
And you also get, with ice wines, I'm a huge fan of ice wines. I don't like sweet wines, but I do like ice wines, and they have to be traditional. And the interesting thing with ice wines, especially out of Canada, they freeze on the vine, and then on the warm days, they warm up a little bit, and you get some wild yeast that are on the skins, and they begin to consume sugars, and then they freeze again. And so you get this like...
It just changes the total profile of the taste.
Yeah, you get this like musty, kind of funky, umami kind of flavor as a result of this thawing and freezing and thawing and freezing. Same thing with this French Sauterne wine. You know, it's called Noble Rot. And, that definitely, you can taste the difference in an ice cider and ice wine that has actually traditionally been frozen as opposed to post-harvesting and post-freezing, sorry.
That sort of noble rot you're talking about, we did capture that in this cider.
Oh.
This is actually a very clean taste, but we did use the wild and native culture from the Rockland County farm that we're working with to ferment this. So they're located in Pomona, New York, so we named the culture Pomona.
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
It's your own yeast strain.
It's a multiculture, but it ferments out really well, really clean, and it came naturally from those apples. So
That's so nice.
It works really well. Here, let me give you guys a taste,
Absolutely.
and then I can get into the other.
Absolutely. While we're doing that, we've had a lot happen in the past couple of weeks, so we're going to talk a little bit about some new and goods. You had some things. Obviously, Rich came in without crutches.
Thank you, sir. I've gone from an infant to a awkward teenager in about 8 weeks.
Okay.
They say twice a man. What do they say? Twice a child, once a man?
I think I'm going on once a man,
Cheers.
twice a
Twice a
child,
child, there you go.
and milking it. So,
But you came in on your own 2 feet.
I did. So off the crutches, off the cast, and hobbling well.
That's awesome.
So I should get my special parking ticket in the mail any minute. So I can milk that.
So you get an actual handicap,
I do.
which actually could have worked, maybe weeks ago
Yeah.
when we didn't get when we got slapped with parking tickets across our.
Across the road. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
right
got-
on the driver's side.
Yeah. Just a little.
Yeah, so on the mend with that, as you know, we have chickens, so we just got a whole new set of baby chickens coming.
You saw that? That was on our Facebook page. Rich is a chicken whisperer, by the way.
Nah, not really. I just,
Dude, complete chicken whisperer.
He's a chick magnet.
Here's to you.
There you go.
Here's to you being a
Thanks,
chicken
mate.
whisperer. Cheers, ice cider.
Cheers.
First ice. That's awesome. Here we go.
So this one is 8.5% because we got that residual kind of concentration of the apples there before we crushed and pressed it. The other method you can use is actually letting the juice, crushing and pressing the juice, and then letting the juice actually freeze, and then thawing it and taking the ice floats on the top, and you take the concentrated
So
juice
from
out of your
underneath,
valve
right.
on the bottom.
Right?
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's
man.
Just so
It's-
smooth.
it's very. Is it wrong to say it's got some champagne notes to it?
I appreciate that.
Okay, good. It definitely. And I'm not a fan of champagne.
We make our ciders. I try and elevate it a little bit. Like you were saying, you got your worst hangover in your life from a cider.
Yeah.
I like to give people their bang for their buck, and the drier it is, the more alcoholic it's going to be, the more flavor you're going to get out of that, and you're going to have a better time the day of, and then less residual sugar giving you a hangover the night after.
Actually, a
the
buddy
day
of
after.
ours just posted on this thread, what's the difference between what we're drinking and scrumpy? It's just the concentration of...
The concentration of the apples, type of apples, scrumpy usually, like we were talking about with that Huguenot cider, to answer your question, will have a little bit more of a tart profile to it or a rustic profile,
Right.
kind of gets a little bit more acetobacter exposure, and what that is in layman's terms is just vinegar exposure, so it has a little bit more of a kind of like tart vinegarized taste to it. Which is something that's standard in a lot of cider profiles, like Basque region cider. A lot of American producers are now making quote-unquote Basque region or Spanish-style ciders, which have that kind of vinegarization to them.
Just because sours are so popular now. Yeah.
And a lot of them are branding it as sours. The nomenclature gets a little confusing when you get over to the United States. We like to make up our own names for a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
I like a Basque style, minus all the violence.
Well, I think in the American palate, if people start understanding what the difference in types of sours are, then if you know that most sour ciders are coming from a vinegarization rather than in sour beers, they use a lot of lactobacillus.
Yeah.
Lactobacillus is known for giving a more of a candy sour taste. So if you look at the ingredients on like Sour Patch Kids or Sour Straws or something like that, you'll see lactic acid.
Lactic acid, yeah.
And that's a totally different profile from what a sour cider will give you. The vinegar sour has more of a kind of like, it's more intense.
It's also a lot more complex and not as one-dimensional. It's going to give a lot more flavors as opposed to a very one-dimensional, just lactic acid.
It is, and it depends on your preference and tastes, what you go for. I don't often see a vinegarized beers being pitched that way, you know. So
Yeah.
it's really about perception, palate, and what's popular and in vogue in the way that we present it, right?
This, I mean,
What outcome you're looking for at the end of the night?
I would drink this all day with like, you know, like
Well, thank you, sir.
a good like some heavy cheese and like charcuterie.
It's
I think
too easy.
Yeah, it's got a nice ability, I think, to cut through something like a good like Roquefort cheese or
It's those-
even seafood. I think it would be phenomenal.
It's
with
the
seafood.
tannins and acids in here, man.
Yeah.
I really, my general pH level, I mean, this is technical, but like I like to ride around like 3.5, 3.6, which is fairly low. You won't see beers that low usually, unless they're sours, but it's it makes a more complex beverage for
Yeah.
the consumer.
Yeah.
You know, the acids cut the tannins, and the tannins bring that bitter level to it, and you've got this. You're always going to have sweetness because it's coming from apples,
Yeah,
depending on what apples it is. So you don't just want it to be sweet. That's one dimensional.
You want
know?
it balanced. You want
Yep.
it. You want the whole thing. It's
Some aftertaste in
Yeah.
there.
Yep.
Little
And
kick
you-
in the end.
so Rich brought something to go along with it.
When I figure all these eggs I'm having, I should try and venture out with.
I told you he's an egg whisperer, but I think what you made, which I don't.
I'd never heard of it till yesterday, so I'm looking for egg recipes.
Are you hungry?
Yeah, of course.
Gypsy, you're hungry? Okay.
Okay, so this is called a roulade. So basically, I never
I've
it
had
before.
beef roulade.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's just
basically, it's a pastry made out of eggs and flour,
Okay.
and baked, and then basically you put whatever filling you want in the middle of it. I did spinach, mushrooms, onions, and what do you call those things?
sun-dried tomatoes.
Thank you very much. And you bake the crap out of it, and
Yeah, it almost looks like a souffle, but
Sounds
there's-
like a quiche minus the pie crust.
exactly.
exactly. It's a bit like a meringue. I made meringues last week. We didn't get time to eat them on the air, but basically it's just your egg whites, meringue sugar as opposed to this is flour. Bake the crap out of it and do what you want. So
Yeah, it's very souffle looking.
you might want to chop some of that.
Some of
with
that. What's this?
That's
This.
salsa. I just thought that might
All right.
work a little. It might taste like crap because I've never made it before, but
So what inspired you to make it? Cider.
sure.
All right.
And a shitload of eggs I don't know what to do with.
Well, you should have brought him here.
I bought them to Gypsy the other week. So
Listen, we're running low. I always can use some more
I'm
fresh
on it,
eggs.
mate. On it. So
Just real quick, Chris.
Yeah.
Some of the creamiest eggs I've ever had before, scrambled eggs I've ever had before from a fresh. I've never had like straight from the farm eggs before.
So what do I have to do to get my hands on?
Yeah.
well, we'll come and visit you, loaded with eggs.
Yeah.
Sounds
Do
good.
you guys have
I'll trade you some cider.
Perfect. Do you guys have like a tasting room?
So right now we're in the process of trying to find a spot to build out a proper tasting room.
Right.
We do open our spot for basically we have some taps that I've rigged up, and I'll open my spot for a scheduled appointment just because I have to shuffle things around to get people in my shop. It's pretty chalk to the brim, but
Yeah, I'm sure.
we will do it on a scheduled basis. Oh, you're showing off the eggs. I was like, I'll take one. But just give me, if you're interested in coming by Diner Brew Co, give me a call. My number's on our website, our Facebook, our Instagram.
And
we can set
we'll
something
post
up.
it on this thread.
Awesome.
So that'd be
Yeah.
good.
There you go.
Cheers, mate.
All right, I'm so excited to have this with you.
I'm nervous.
Why are you nervous?
I don't know. I've never before.
You made it.
That's why I'm nervous.
Rich is one of the best cooks, chefs, whatever, and you so.
I like to experiment.
Yeah, but you don't give yourself enough credit. I think,
I'm all right with that.
and that's good. You're too humble.
People would expect too much.
All right, I'm giving it a try. Here we go.
It'd be nice. It'd be.
I'm trying to imagine it warm.
So am I.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really nice, though.
Yeah, it's not.
pretty light.
It's not souffle-y because
No.
of whatever the flour, and it's actually really good and goes really well. I think with the cider.
What have you been up to, mate? A little bit of a suntan going on?
Yeah, does it show?
No.
I'm feeling I went tanning. Went tanning. What's been going on with me? I had a hell of a time in the Bahamas. Went there for a week. We went to an island called Abaco. It's a less touristy kind of island.
Okay.
And we were between a place called Marsh Harbor and Treasure Key, and with some islands off the coast. And definitely not Nassau. This is not like Nassau, Paradise Island.
It's not clubs and swimming pools.
No. It was 20 minutes to the nearest like little cafe, and it was God's country. I was up for every single sunrise. It was absolutely beautiful. I posted a couple pictures, and if you get a chance to go, that was sunrise. That was like a typical sunrise that you see. And
I mean, the clouds just sitting there right on the horizon.
Oh, it
look like mountains.
it was unbelievable. And there's a lot of old reef kind of off where we were, and you can't spearfish
You can't. I thought you did.
with a spear gun
Okay.
in Bahamian waters. You can use a Hawaiian sling or a pole spear, which is basically a long spear with
Hawaiian
a
sling.
sling.
Sounds like a banana hammock.
It, yeah.
But it's not.
It's not.
There goes that
No,
visual.
it's a bit sharper.
Good.
Could kill you.
Gender sphere and all fish.
Yeah.
I mean, it has a thing that a hole goes in, but you know. Oh God, those photos, just unbelievable. But we had a chance to go down and do some pole spear fishing. You can't be on air, so we were just free diving. And one of the things that is encouraged down there, there's a couple of things that I was seeing more and more. There's a lot of restaurants down in the Bahamas that are turtle free, which sounds crazy. But a lot of traditional restaurants still use sea turtle to cook. But a lot of restaurants are opting out to do that, which was really neat. One of the fish that we did get was, do you know what lionfish is?
Of course.
Yeah.
Isn't that poisonous, though?
Yes.
That was my,
Okay.
my question.
I think there's a
How
photo
does that
of it.
work?
So you see the photo of it up there, right? So lionfish is up there. That's one of them that we pole speared. They've got just over a dozen very poisonous spines. If you're careful to not get stung by them, you bring them in, and they're phenomenal, and they're invasive. They have no known predators. Somebody just let a lionfish go from their tank because they felt bad in Miami, and it was a pregnant female, and there are now lionfish derbies all over the place, all over the Caribbean. The lionfish are eradicating small reef fish. Wow. So diversity levels are going down. So it's open.
It's encouraged.
It's encouraged, and we actually met up with a restaurant owner who is going to most likely do a lionfish derby and bring lionfish on tacos, basically, because everyone wants. I'm losing my mic here. Everyone wants grouper, and grouper's just overfished. There's so much out there. So it was phenomenal. So that's pretty much what I've been up to.
There you go.
And then I had a very interesting experience with.
Food Network.
Yeah.
Do it.
So, you know Food Network, right?
Who doesn't?
Okay. So we went.
I did not know that Food Network had restaurants.
I did not know that either. We were at Fort Lauderdale Airport. By the way, never go to Fort Lauderdale Airport.
Arguably by connection, there's one here in Portchester, actually.
A Food Network kitchen.
Well, there's Mario Batali's place over
Yes.
here, Terry Lodge.
But this is.
He's not exactly Food Network, but
right.
been on the shows enough, right?
He's a little bit on the down low right now.
Yeah.
And so he. So basically, Food Network has this kitchen, and you can go to Fort Lauderdale Airport and sit down, get food, and you think it would be like this amazing Food Network quality. It was awful. I had like a wrap sandwich, and there's a photo of it. It's lettuce. It's lettuce in a wrap. So it was a little disappointing.
Yeah.
For Food Network, I was kind of a little bummed.
Bit of false advertising?
Yeah, and we had. It says on the menu there are these homemade Bloody Marys. So my wife and I are excited to get a Bloody Mary. There's a sandwich. Oh, it's lettuce with a piece of chicken.
It really is.
No, it wasn't even chicken. It was garbanzo beans. Yeah, and so the Bloody Mary. She's like, don't say anything, but it's not our Bloody Mary mix. I know it says it on the menu, but it's not ours. I'm like, oh wow, okay. I'm like, I didn't get a picture of the Bloody Mary. She's like, it's ocean spray.
You're just that.
Yeah.
You're that kind of guy
as
people
it's
want to
not
give
ours?
secrets to.
Yeah, right,
She
right,
looked
right.
at you and she was like, "You need to know this."
She's like, you need to know this. Infowars.com.
Oh dear.
So,
Don't put it on Reddit.
I know. So I was a little disappointed. So and then like I watch Food Network, and it was disappointing. There was no craft beverage. There was nothing. It was all Brown Foreman, all big big brand name kind of stuff. So I don't know. It was kind of it was disappointing. That's all. That's my new and good. That's all I got.
I like it.
Okay, there we go.
Let's do the third cider. We
Let's
are
do it.
wrapping up in time. We've got
I know.
10 minutes.
I know. All right, this is exciting.
This one is partially thanks to Matt, actually. So Matt and I met at a farmer's market here in Rye.
We're not dating. We're just kind of seeing each other.
At farmer's market.
There's a little barrel exchange going on.
Yeah.
So he and I kind of like
is that what
hit
they
it
call
off.
it?
Yeah. I don't know. What are the kids calling it
I
nowadays?
don't know. Barrel exchanging.
Yeah. So we were talking, and he was saying how it would be really cool to do a cider-aged bourbon. And I have experimented with bourbon aging with my cider before with bourbon barrels.
That's cool.
And I was talking to him about his making method, and it all kind of checked out for what I thought was a good process for distilling. And the mash bill sounded really cool, so I was like, let's give it a try. So Matt was nice enough to deliver one of his barrels to DeChico's in Brewster, which is one of my accounts.
Saw that, yeah.
I picked up, we have our products on the shelf, and right now we've got the cider that we're going to try on tap there. So if people want to try our Cash Earnin' Bourbon Cider.
Did you see the April Fool's joke from the Chico's?
I did. It was pretty
I
ridiculous.
was so excited.
It was awesome.
It was. They were going to...
One day.
Yeah.
That's a vision for the future, right?
It was. I was very excited. But
DeChico's is a very big... It's a mecca for craft beverage around here.
Well, they helped put this together, too. The guys behind the counter there, I mean, Vinny, Greg, Chris, Rob.
Chris is gone.
Chris is gone now, but, the three remain, and those dudes were really psyched about your bourbon specifically, and they kind of pushed me. They said...
It's not my bourbon. I work for Taconic.
Well, you are the master distiller.
I am not the master distiller by any means, but I'm a semi-important person. Let's put it that way.
It's pretty good.
Okay, thanks.
We'll put it that way.
he can drink.
So anyways, they were telling me about your stuff, and I know I basically had said I'd met you and I wanted to try it, and they were like, well, let's see what we can do. So via those guys, the collaboration happened. You drop off the barrel, I go back, drop off some product, pick up the barrel. 2 months later is a couple of weeks ago. I pull the stuff out of the barrel. I usually like to do a nice light aging with bourbon. It can really take over the flavor profile with cider. Yeah. Cider doesn't hide anything. With beer, you can really
cover it up.
You can futz around with some dark grains, nice robust grains. You can really hide a lot of flavors and sneak chocolate in there, or coffee, or things that are very, very...
Oysters and lobsters.
Yep, exactly. But so I like to do a nice light age with bourbon. I usually air toward 2 months, and that's where I like to sit it. So I put it away, put it in a timeout for 2 months, took it out about 2 weeks ago, went up to see Matt at Taconic to give him a keg.
That's cool.
And that's basically where we're at. My ciders are always, apple forward, cider forward. Anytime I do a cider flavor pairing, like we do a miso cider, that one, the miso is very subtle. We do
We had
a
the
lavender.
miso on here a few weeks ago, right?
We had it a few weeks ago, and that was just on the New York Times.
It
Very
was.
good.
We were really,
Congratulations.
thank you, and thank you to Orr, the writer who works with Front Burner. I mean, that article was so flattering and wonderful, and being that we're in front of the public for 5 months, I couldn't ask for more as a new company. It was so cool.
And it's about going outside of your comfort zone a little bit.
That's what that cider represents.
Completely.
I didn't even come up with the idea. It was my best friend, and he suggested it. I immediately turned him down, and then I thought to myself, this is the year of saying yes instead of no, and trying new things.
Right?
Yeah.
And we did a home batch, and then we liked it. We started scaling it up, figuring out the process at scale. But that was the combination of being in the right place at the right time and saying, I'm going to try something that makes me uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
And that was really cool what came out of it.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that was the miso cider, but the barrel that you gave back to us that we barrel aged your ice cider in.
And this is the barrel exchange.
This
what
is
those
the barrel,
kids are doing.
A little bit of back and forth, if you know what I mean. I'm hoping that we can fill it with bourbon and do a New York ice cider finished bourbon, but that's not up to me. I can only influence. But
Use all of your influence.
I will try. I will try. So let's give this a try.
Yeah, so this is the same ice cider we were just drinking, same blend of apples.
Okay.
It actually got another tenth of a gravity point in the bourbon barrel aging, so this is 8.5%, not 8.4.
Wow.
And what we did with this was ferment it with a champagne yeast instead of letting the wild culture take it.
Okay.
I just wanted to keep everything very even since we were doing this collaboration
Yeah.
with this barrel. And after 2 months, you still get a lot of cider forward notes, but you're going to get more kind of like vanilla off it. You're obviously going to get the bourbon character. You're going to get the char,
the oak.
Yep.
It's nice.
Let me come around and pour
All
you
right.
guys some.
Cool.
And this is in a DeChico's crowler. So crowlers are the new, aluminum.
Yes, which they are
32
going.
ounces of joy.
Yeah,
Sublime had it wrong.
that's such a great idea. I love.
Also right.
Yeah, it's.
And this is what they're going to be shipping via drone direct to your house soon enough.
Yes, and I just I posted that on our Facebook page. I
love that theory.
Is starting a drone delivery service.
Wait, who is?
The Chico.
DeChico's
That was their April Fools. I was all up for
drone
it, mate.
delivery.
I'm like, sign me up. My wife's like, it's $8 just for the delivery. I'm like, we'll have 5 of them. Next day.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So this is a 2-month barrel-aged ice cider brought to you by Diner Brew Company and Chris Sheldon.
And Taconic Distilling.
Oh,
Oh,
And you
Yes.
do. You get an edge of bourbon on there.
isn't that good?
Yeah.
we make this every day.
We're keeping it
drink
rolling.
every
We
day.
actually just filled or swelled the last barrel that Matt gave me. So when we gave him the cider barrel back, the bourbon with the cider aged in it, he
Nice.
gave us another bourbon barrel. I hope we can keep this rolling.
Rolling.
Because
It's phenomenal. The oak gives it this kind of buttery mouthfeel to it. It takes down a little bit of the acidity and just gives it a different profile to it.
it's totally different. And it's cool that we had the two ciders back to back now because
right.
you can really see the difference. The
Compare the
acid.
two, right.
What you just said is the biggest thing I noticed too, is that when you barrel age with your barrels, the acid content that was on the initial cider really gets much more subdued in the flavor
Yeah.
profile. And I get so much vanilla off of it.
I get a lot of vanilla and a nice mouthfeel, and I think obviously that's the residual bourbon, those caramel, that butterscotch, that vanilla, and probably the 3 char on it is probably helping to
The technical
mellow
stuff.
out some of the acid on it. But
To me, I love it because it tastes like there's a shot of bourbon in it.
There you go.
Straight up.
That's
Just-
it. And
Right.
it's-
I mean,
And it's all cider.
all cider,
Yeah.
so it's like
And it just flows down.
see now, I would love this. I would love this at a bar. Give me like a 12, not 12 ounce, like 8 ounces of this. No, fuck that. Give me
24.
give me the Applebee's
Yeah, yeah.
32 ounce, like my life sucks
give me a
beer.
chalice. right. Let me get a boot of beer.
Let's
Take
not
a
beat
hurricane
around
to
this
the bayou,
bush.
please.
Do that and a shot of Taconic bourbon side by side, sip, and
And an Uber.
Well, what
And
was
a new
nice
Uber,
was
that's right.
Matt was nice enough to give us some of the private reserve that we were able to, just try along the way, just for a taste reference. It's all about research.
a little bit of wetting the barrel.
And dare I suggest maybe we figure out some combo of this plus something at Smokehouse,
Oh damn!
like with some ribs. I mean, this would just be amazing.
That would be
I got to
killer.
talk to Anum about
I'm just
that.
saying.
I would love to do, 72 ounce of this. It keeps going up.
I'll take a gallon.
A gallon,
Let's do it once.
Where's the IV?
bourbon and like ribs, like combo, and I think that'd be phenomenal.
Sounds easy enough.
Dude, I cannot thank you enough. Chris, this
I'm
has been,
psyched on the project. Man.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, it really brings a light to what cider making is and what it will be and what it continues.
Oh, thank you for saying that. It's great to be on your show, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We like to. We're gonna be finishing up. You can find Diner Brew Company. Just go to their website. We posted it on our Facebook page.
Mount Vernon, 2
Mount-
Cortlandt Street in Mount Vernon, right off
There you
the
go.
end of the 2 train if you're coming from the city. And
Oh, there you go.
exit, I think it's 10C off of the Bronx River, but 2 exits south of 287.
Absolutely, and a couple places that you can purchase Diner Brew cider.
DeChico's?
DeChico's.
The entire DeChico's chain. You can get our bourbon barrel cider in only 5 locations right now. We did a special release. Beer Noggin, you can get it at Halftime. You can get it at DeChico's, Larchmont, Millwood, and Brewster. So look for us in all those spots.
And you guys are in the movie theater in
Yes, we're in Yonkers on Central Park Ave at the Alamo Draft House. They've got
Alamo Draft House. That's
awesome.
great.
It's awesome, man. They've got our Miso cider for the Isle of Dogs release, the Wes Anderson film.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, and we'll post that on our Facebook page too. Some spots you can get it.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Awesome show. You are welcome on any time.
Thanks, guys.
And make sure you look us up, Rogues on the Road, and Gypsy. Thank you. Gypsy's always in the corner. Always has our back.
He's a man.
And we'll see you. We'll see you in
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Chris. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Carry on.
This is Rogues on the Road with Matt Froman and Rich Marshall, where we talk food, travel, craft beverages, and everything in between.